Well, hello and welcome as we continue our chronological read through of Scripture. Quite a bit of time has passed in the narrative since we left Isaac and his family in our last reading. When we join Isaac again in Genesis chapter 27 today, he's about 136 years old, and his eyesight is failing. Isaac isn't too sure how much longer he's going to live, although it turns out that he lives, I believe, another 40 years after this. But at this point in time, he's not so sure about that. So he wants to bless Esau, the older son, even though that runs counter to the prophecy given to Rebekah, and actually even counter to the great conflict that the family was feeling because of Esau's wives. If you don't recall that from the very end of our reading the other day, that's verses 34 and 35 at the end of chapter 26. Isaac sent Esau out to hunt and to prepare a delicious meal for him. And then when Esau returns, Isaac's intention was to give Esau the blessing. Rebekah hears this, and she immediately schemes with Jacob to receive the blessing before Esau returns. So she cooks one of Isaac's favorite meals. She dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, and she puts skins of goat on Jacob's hands and neck, where Isaac would be likely to touch Jacob, because Esau was a very hairy man and Jacob was not. In this way, they deceived Isaac, and Jacob did indeed receive the blessing. No sooner than had Jacob left with Isaac's blessing than Esau returned from his hunt, and he came to present Isaac with the food that he had hunted for and prepared for him, and of course to receive the blessing that Isaac had promised. Well, Isaac quickly realized that he'd been deceived, and he trembled with anger when he realized that. He stated very clearly that the blessing that he had given to Jacob, it turns out, would indeed stand. So Esau also is furious because Jacob has now cheated him twice. Once out of the double share of the inheritance that would have been Esau's, and now out of the blessing that Isaac had intended to give Esau, but that Jacob received instead. So we will see soon, we're going to see, actually, before we get done here, we'll see today how Jacob's deceitful ways turn on him, and he's treated in like manner by Laban, but that part of the story is yet to come. Esau insists on receiving some kind of a blessing as well. Maybe he thought that Isaac had held something back so that he would have something to bless Jacob with after he had blessed Esau. But Isaac's blessing to Jacob had been comprehensive and complete. Isaac has no blessing for Esau, but instead he declares that Esau's descendants will make a living by the sword, plundering others rather than living off the bountiful crops of the land. But there was one ray of hope. Even though Esau, and therefore his descendants, the Edomites, would serve Israel, one day their yoke would be broken, as indeed it was when the Edomites successfully rebelled against Judah's king Jehoram, and that ended the domination of the Edomites by the Israelites that began with King David. Now, Esau's anger, well, it just simply does not abate. He plans to kill Jacob when their father Isaac dies. Rebekah finds out about his plan, and she sends Jacob away to her brother Laban for a little while until things settle down, or at least she wants to send Jacob to her brother Laban for a while until things settle down. It turns out that she'll never see Jacob again because a little while turns into 20 years. She's also careful not to let her role in the scheme to deceive Isaac be known. So rather than just sending Jacob away, she gets Isaac to insist that Jacob go to Rebekah's family's house and find a wife there, rather than marrying one of the the Canaanite women, as Esau's wives had caused great grief for both Isaac and Rebekah. So off Jacob went, still hoping for a blessing. Esau marries a member of the family of Abraham by marrying a granddaughter of Ishmael. See, Esau figured that since it was his wives that it was causing such grief, that if he was to marry a wife from the family of Abraham, then things would be better, that he would receive a blessing. And he tries to do that by marrying a granddaughter of Abraham's son, Ishmael. By the way, another moment of my digression here. God had not asked for anyone's help in making sure that Jacob received the blessing that God had told Rebekah he would. God told Rebekah he'd get that blessing. He was going to get it. Everybody decides to step in and help God out. And actually, in the process, everyone acts counter to God's will. Isaac seems insistent on giving the blessing to Esau anyway. Esau's murderous intent reminds us of Cain, whom we read about, 16 or 17 sections back. Rebekah uses her position to scheme and deceive, and Jacob just flat out lies, even using God's name at one point to bolster his lie. Still, in spite of all this, God works his will and his way, not because of them, but in spite of them. So Jacob is on his way to Laban's house. And one evening, he receives a vision in the form of a dream of a ladder reaching up to heaven, with the Lord standing at the top and giving Jacob a blessing that's basically the same as the blessings we heard God give to Abraham and Isaac, that he would receive the land on which he lay, that his offspring would be as numerous as the dust of the earth, and that the world would be blessed through him. Jacob named that place Bethel, and he set up a stone there. Actually, the stone that he had used as a pillow, he set up as a pillar and anointed it in oil in an act of worship. Jacob vows that if God is faithful to his promise, he will worship him, that he will make that place God's house, where he is right now, which he actually does later. He returns and builds an altar there, and that he will give to the Lord a tenth of all his wealth. So Jacob now continues on. And on reaching the land where Laban lives, Rebekah's brother Laban lives, Jacob finds himself by a well where the shepherds come to water their flocks. There he meets Rachel, a daughter of Laban, and is welcomed into Laban's home, where he stays for a month. Jacob had gone to Laban to obtain a wife. So when Laban asked Jacob what his wages should be for the labor that he's providing, Jacob said that he would work for 7 years for the hand of Rachel. Based on the wages of the time, this actually exceeded even the maximum bride price set later under Mosaic law. So it was a generous offer indeed. At the end of the 7 years, Jacob asks for his bride. Actually, he demands his bride. And while receiving the customary wedding and the wedding gifts and all that other kind of stuff, Laban gives Jacob Leah instead of Rachel, as they had agreed to 7 years before. Now, Laban's excuse when confronted on this was simply that it wasn't their custom to allow the younger daughter to be married before the older, and that Jacob could have Rachel as well after completing the week with Leah. So, as I mentioned earlier, the deceiver ends up being deceived, and Laban secured another 7 years of labor from Jacob because, of course, the dowry, the bride price that was set was 7 years of labor. Leah realizes that she's rejected, not loved by Jacob, and she constantly longs for Jacob's love. She constantly longs for his favor, and she hopes that the children that she bears for Jacob, actually 4 sons in what appears to be very quick succession, she prays that she desires that would endear her to Jacob, especially when Rachel seems unable to bear any children. When we get together for our next reading, we're going to find out that things start to get a little bit complicated here in this competition between the sisters for Jacob's affections, and Leah's desire for Jacob's endearment, for his love, never really appears to be satisfied. May God be with you and bless you. There really isn't a way to abbreviate this reading today. It's pretty full from beginning to end, so I couldn't really find anything to carve out from it. May God be with you, bless you as you do the reading, and I look forward to getting together with you again tomorrow.